Hello everybody, it's Tommy and welcome back to another video for the Disney Save. Today, we are starting out with a little bit of a bang here because this is not only a huge, massive build, massive video. I hope you guys enjoy the length today. This is a really big build to start out with, and I normally do not start this strong and with something this big and so many details and so many things that went into it. But we are starting in Ravenwood, my brand new world for the Disney Save. I have long been building up to this point. You guys sat through all of my renovations. You dealt with all of the behind the scenes, trying to update, trying to get it to a point in my save file where I felt like it was finally time to move on to the next world. And after all that waiting, we are finally here in the brand new world that comes with The Sims 4 Life and Death. This was chosen by my patrons. I planned it out with my patrons as well. I hope you guys are going to be excited for some of the movies that we have coming up for this world. If you go back in some of my previous videos, I've actually talked about a lot of them, so they're not really a secret at this point, but we are actually starting out first and foremost with the Black Cauldron. And this was decided by my patrons. So something that I do offer occasionally over on my Patreon is that I actually let my patrons pick which movies we start with in a world or what neighborhood we're going to move on to next even. And they actually decided on the Black Cauldron, which I was very, very surprised was the choice. There's a different, more popular-ish, might be Disney princess movie that is going into this world, and I definitely thought that that was going to be the winner. Nevertheless, I was not upset that this won at all. It is equally one that I sort of wanted to get out of the way, if I'm honest, because it's not a popular Disney movie by any means. And it also has some builds that I feel like they're just a little bit less iconic. But at the end of the day, I ended up really enjoying this entire process. I really enjoyed this castle recreation. It was a really horrible start, and I'll get into all of that. It was a really complicated build. But this is Horn King's Castle from the Black Cauldron. And a lot of you probably remember that I have actually built this castle before. So this used to exist in its first form back in Forgotten Hollow. And when I did my Forgotten Hollow renovation, I mentioned that I was going to be renovating that castle and updating it and bringing it to Ravenwood officially, where it will hopefully stay in perpetuity. And the plan originally was definitely to just renovate that old castle that I had made. But the more I looked at it, and the more I sat down and actually rewatched the entire movie, which, to be honest with you, back when I did the first version of Horn King's Castle, I'm not even sure if I really watched the Black Cauldron for real. I believe I might have skimmed through it because it is an odd Disney movie, let's be so honest. And I actually gave it a real watch, and I decided I really want to give myself an opportunity to give this castle another go and try again. This does end up working out, to be honest with you, because the first version I built, although I really liked it, it was an accumulation of a bunch of different ideas. It wasn't a true Horn King's Castle movie recreation because it was a home that was supposed to be not just for Horn King, but for Chernobog and Hades. So really the base of the castle itself was most definitely Horn King's Castle. But then I added some pieces to it, particularly on the roof adornments that were more reminiscent of Chernobog. Chernobog lives in the mountain, and he may even be like the mountain itself. And so I wanted to bring lots of rocks, lots of sharp, jagged edges and roughness, and add that in as a way to make the different characters from the different movies blend into one castle that they could all live in. And then on the very bottom floor, underneath the dungeon of Horn King's Castle, was the part of the castle that was paying tribute to Hades, because I recreated a version of the underworld down there. And so it would have been really easy to just put that castle back down here, delete the underground, and redo a couple of little things and just call it Horn King's Castle. And I think in my mind, I even originally kind of intended to do that. I thought to myself, you don't really have to make this castle. Most of the work is already done. But after watching the movie, I decided I wanted to give this one another shot and have it be much more of a true movie recreation and put as many details from the Black Cauldron inside of the castle as I possibly could. It also occurred to me during watching that this castle is supposed to have a moat, and I really haven't done like a traditional dark, creepy medieval castle with a moat, which is like one of the most classic versions of a castle that you could ever possibly imagine. So it checks a lot of boxes, and it gave me a chance to do something that is a little bit like a bit of a classic idea, but it is still inside of Disney, and I get to bring a new castle type of build to my save file that's very specific. I have other castles. I have Elsa's ice castle. I have the beautiful Arendelle castle. I have the Brave castle, but a lot of those lean towards Disney princesses and Disney princess theming, and they have these light, high royalty aspects to them. And this is definitely the opposite of that in pretty much every single capacity. This is broken, run down, abandoned, crumbling, medieval, dark, dreary, and just a really cool opportunity to do something different. So that old version of the castle would have fit a lot of those things, but what this one does much better is actually stick to the movie. So step number one for me is almost always obviously going to be watching the movie or rewatching the movie, or at least skimming through some of the scenes that take place in the location of where I am building, if I don't have time to like do a dedicated watch through. I did do a dedicated watch through for the Black Cauldron before doing this one, just to say that I did it. It's a little bit longer than I would have liked. It is an extremely weird movie for Disney to have ever made, and I'll talk about that more later on in the video, but I wanted to see what the castle looked like. I wanted to see how many times they show it, all of the catacombs, all of the things that they run through, the rooms, get some of those like background ideas. And at the end of the day, it helps get my mind jogging in the right direction, and the theming and the colors and like trying to match everything and get my mind in the right headspace to make it as accurate as possible. But the issue immediately becomes apparent because Horn King's castle, I would not say is like an iconic Disney castle, right? It is not one that most people, if asked, no matter how much of a Disney expert you are or claim to be, most people probably could not tell me too many details about it and would probably describe it as like dark, evil, black, dreary castle. And so when that is the case, the issue kind of becomes, how do I pull out the details that are important when most people don't even really know what the castle looks like to begin with? And the movie doesn't even really know what the castle looks like, because every scene that it's drawn in from a distance, where you get those long distance exterior shots that are supposed to be pretty much my most helpful resource for making something like this, the movie is color graded so dark and literally like black against a red sky, you lose any details that you could possibly pull out about the exterior of this. The shape is sort of organic looking, and the only thing that I was really able to find as far as helping me with where rooms are laid out, maybe some kind of a shape or actual structure, was one single YouTube video where someone had made almost like a clay molded version of the castle. And it did look to be very accurate, but it looked very organic. Like it looked like a big square blob base with not a lot of detail, almost like rocks, almost coming straight out of the earth. And then the top of it had a couple of towers. And then some of those towers had little carvings to show like maybe where a window here or there was. And other than that, there isn't a ton of details to pull. So then when I originally went into the castle and I tried to make it, I'm working off of really poor references. And I know some of the things that I want to include, but most of that is going to be on the interior. So as far as matching the exterior and making it look as accurate to the movie as possible, number one, we just don't have the correct amount of floors available in The Sims 4 to completely pull this off, I think, to the most recognizable form that this castle should be. I would estimate that just for like the base of the castle alone that's coming out of the moat, I probably needed at least 3 to 4 floors against the moat to just be that base square structure that is like the bottom tower of the castle. And then the top level probably needed another 3 to 4 to make towers of varying heights, to make towers that are kind of hanging or floating off of the side of the castle, and give some different heights to the roofs and the different towers that are located at the very, very top of the castle. So that's at least 8 levels. And the more that I was doing it, and I actually redid the castle 3 times total because I kept trying to layer rooms in different ways to get some kind of a shape together. And this comes up, I'm not going to lie to you, pretty much with every castle that I do. Height is always an issue. You always want it to be grand and tall and very important. But the other thing to remember is one of the ways that you can easily make a castle very, very tall is just by making a really, really tall foundation. But when you do that, you have to have stairs that go all the way up to the top of those foundations. And then the higher you make the foundation piece, the higher the stairs need to be to match it. And the higher the stairs need to be, the more tiles that those stairs take up. So since this is not a 64 by 64, and even if it was, to be honest with you, the stairs would have had to been so high and such a pain, by the way, when you're playing the game and the Sims are trying to like walk up the castle steps and it takes them like an in-game hour to get up the steps. To actually do that, it would have been not very usable. And I don't think that on this lot size, I was going to be able to get the height out of the foundation that I really wanted. So I started to use different rooms. And then what I ultimately ended up doing is basically ignoring that bottom square structure, that foundation of the castle, and really just focusing on the top part of the castle as a part of my recreation. So I hope that it makes sense. But when you look at Horn King's Castle, if you Google it or if you rewatch the movie, you might look at mine and not immediately recognize my version as Horn King's Castle, and that's totally okay. But I am basically focusing on that like top couple of floors of the castle, and I think ultimately it makes a very, very playable castle, which is very awesome. To me, it's still very recognizable. I looked at that castle so much and the 3D model that I did find so much, and I settled on this being the answer considering the game's mechanics. I can only fight against the game mechanics so much. Another little bit of a thing that I was fighting at the very beginning of this video, when we jumped right into it, you might have noticed that I already built the bridge. And it was something that when I do think about Horn King's Castle, and I think that one of the only iconic pieces about the exterior is that arching bridge that goes over the top of the moat. And that's also a very classic idea for a medieval castle like this. So I really wanted it to be there, and that created a complication yet again for the stairs, because that's really where the stairs would have gone. So I couldn't have done the stairs and the bridge, and that is a functional bridge. It took me forever to do it, and I pretty much spent a few hours just alone on the bridge getting that working and getting everything going on that. So I decided to just cut that from the video because it was a lot of trial and error. And then once I was okay with the bridge, I had to redo the structure in the back. And like I said, I did it 3 times. So the one you're watching today is the one I ultimately ended up settling on. But every single version that I built, no matter how I did it, it still generally looked the same. And that's why on the 3rd version, I finally decided I must be doing something right. And I must be going in a direction that I feel like is what I'm supposed to be doing. Because even though it doesn't immediately scream Horn King's Castle, every single time I attempt this build, the general structure looks identical almost, with a few rooms maybe shifted a couple of tiles here and there. So I settled on it, and I really was worried that I was like settling, especially for such a big build and such a big castle. And then the more I did it, the more I added details, the more I just kept working on everything. I realized I ultimately made the right decision. And I absolutely love how this castle turns out. It is so highly detailed in a way that I did not think was going to be possible with the items that we have in game. Endless reminder that we do not have a Sims 4 medieval pack. So whenever you need to build anything inside of that window, it is a huge challenge to collect all of the different pieces from all of the different packs that fit and will make sense in a build like this, and then try to just stick with that and just use those items to decorate and to make something that feels very lived in, when we just don't have like a pack that's dedicated to the theming of it and it's so specific. It ultimately ends up being a combination between the Horses pack, Star Wars, unfortunately, a lot of Life and Death, some Enchanted by Nature, but not anything that leaned into the green, magical, pretty aesthetic that that pack has. Jungle Adventure was super helpful for this. A little bit of base game, a little bit of get to work, and just a lot of really thinking about it and finding my feet when I was in the first stages of this castle and in that first room, picking out some things and trying to really think about, like, what do I want to use in here? What are the rules? What kind of dynamics am I setting up for this build? And then going from there. And it was a really natural flow. It only took so long, not because I couldn't figure out like what to do or what to place, but after that, it just, this castle's huge. There are so many rooms. There's so much to go over in total. It ends up being probably somewhere close to 10 or 12 bedrooms. If you consider the dungeon rooms to be bedrooms, which I guess that I do. There are a couple of master bedrooms in here. There is a full kitchen, pantry, dining, the whole dungeon downstairs. There is a room that is dedicated to the room where Taryn finds the sword specifically. There is a space that's dedicated to where the cauldron gets put in the movie after the Horn King actually gets the cauldron back and he brings it back to his castle. There is a treasury of some kind. There's lots and lots of space for characters to gather and celebrate. A great hall, a outdoor, what would you call it? Like a patio outside, courtyard. Courtyard is probably the right word. A throne room, and honestly more, if you can believe it. Lots of bathrooms, very, very usable overall. The upstairs is kind of interesting as well. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more specifically when we actually go up there. But first, let's talk about the plan of who is actually going to live here. Like I mentioned to you guys, in the first version of this castle that I ever built, the only character that I really made was Horn King. There was a set of townie characters for the fair folk at the time also that got squeezed into Forgotten Hollow. I actually lost my copy of those characters. I took them out of the save file a while ago because they needed some serious work and some updating. And in one of my patches to the Disney save, I just pulled them out and put it on a list of stuff that I was going to update later. And then over time, I forgot about them a little bit. And then I ended up deleting all of my copies of them somehow. I'm sure I could scrape up an old version of them if I really wanted to. But to be honest with you, if I'm going to be adding them back into the save file, I would rather at this point, since we have the Sims 4 fairies, I would rather just remake them anyway. So that's totally fine. But Horn King was the only sim that I had made from the Black Cauldron. I've never made Taryn. I've never made Alonwi. I have never made any of the other characters from the movie. And that meant that the household immediately was going to have to get some attention and who is actually going to live here. So Horn King is getting a pretty major overhaul as far as what his clothing looks like, his hair, his eyes. I updated him quite a bit already. And that's the next video that you guys are going to be seeing, of course, the create a sim for the characters that will actually be living here. In his household, I also decided to include several henchman characters because they are shown in the movie. So I did actually have some characters to go off of and recreate from the film. So the ones that I did make are all actually based on the movie. And then Creeper was a tough one. Creeper is Horn King's little henchman. I originally was not going to make Creeper, and I was just going to make Creeper a familiar to Horn King. Horn King in the first version of the Disney save had a familiar, and I believe I chose the little floating skull familiar, and then I named him Creeper, and that was my little tribute to that character. I think I have this like really weird thing when it comes to making some of those henchmen or characters that are like short and goblin-like that are from Disney media. I hate making them. I even felt this way back when I did LeFou, but only LeFou just because he's like small. And I feel like I can never get a perfect recreation of those characters because you can't play with height in this game. So I'm always kind of looking for a little bit of an excuse to maybe not do the character. And to be honest with you, do I personally feel that Creeper is like an end-all be-all character and absolutely needs to be a part of the household? I don't feel that way. But some of my patrons were chatting about it, and I decided I would at least try and see how he turned out. And I didn't hate him, ultimately, when I did my version of him. So that means he is included. He almost wasn't. I'm really, really, like, I did not want to make this character. And I am glad that I did. I think you guys are going to like the version that I did of him, and he does look a lot like Creeper. There is a guard dog that is shown in the Black Cauldron, and I added that guard dog to this household as well, just for a little bit of diversity amongst the household. And then I decided to do, I guess, something maybe a little bit interesting. Rather than have this castle household just be Horn King and his henchmen, and rather than just fill it up with a whole bunch of henchmen, because it would have just been Horn King, Creeper, and then 6 other random henchmen, or I guess 5 if you include the dog as his own thing, I decided that what would be better is to actually have Elanwi and Fluter, who is the bard from the movie, live in this household, or at least start here, because they are both prisoners that are shown in this castle, and that's how we're introduced to them as characters. So I thought that that was interesting because no, they don't technically live here. No, they are not actually really a part of this quote unquote family, but they live here right now, and it gives you a jumping off point with the Black Cauldron characters, because Terran is going to be living at his cottage with his other companion characters and some of the other characters that are shown from the Black Cauldron, and he will live in his home in a different location in the Disney save. And then the princess and Fluter are here, and you can come and rescue them. They are being held captive. They are prisoners. Their bedrooms are actually downstairs in the dungeon. I know that this is a little bit morbid, but it does give you something to do. It's that classic save the princess from the castle story idea, and it makes it, I think, maybe a little bit more interesting and something that you can just do. Because when I think about this movie and I think about these characters, maybe because they're just not personally like some of my favorites and they tend to get a little bit swept under the rug, I don't ever really see anyone talk about this movie. I'm trying to come up with a way that you might be more interested to jump into some of the story here. And I think that that might be a really good way to do it, because you kind of have a goal. You need to get at least 2 of the characters in this household out of this household, because they should not be here and the conditions here are pretty terrible. That does also save them from being townies. Elanwi's castle is never shown. She says, I'm a princess. You can assume that it is from a neighboring city or a neighboring village of some kind. I don't know. She never says, and they never show it. And at the end of the movie, all the characters walk off together into the sunset, but you never get to actually see like where they go. You don't know if they go back to Terran's cottage. You don't know anything about that. So you can assume that she has her own castle, she has her own place, and perhaps if they had shown that, there would have been an argument to maybe do that castle as well in this world if I had the room and the space for it. But because they don't show any of that, and she appears at this castle and she was already here before Terran even gets here, and then Fluter comes later and he was already on his own journey and he would have been held here basically, if not for Terran happening to have been here at the same exact time and all of them trying to escape together. It's a way to make them not townies and to have them be a part of a household. And I'm having some discussions right now about like who some of the other Black Cauldron characters, and particularly townies, I will be including in the Disney save anyway. And so I didn't want to do too many of them. So even just thinking about it for a second, there is a version where I would have had to do Fluter as his own townie, one single sim household, Elanwi as her own single sim household, and then maybe some other Black Cauldron random townie characters. There's a couple that would be in groups, possibly the fair folk. It just starts to be a lot. So I decided this was a really, really great way to put the characters into the story, to actively give you something to do, and to have a theme of some kind that I haven't really established in the save file anywhere else, which is a rescue mission, if you will. And yeah, I think that that's a fun thing that you could possibly do. When we go down to the dungeon floors in the bottom level, you're going to be seeing the different bedrooms that I did for the dungeon. Honestly, a lot of them are actually very similar to one another, but I did give Elanwi a little bit of a special something or two to her bedroom because I felt bad for the poor girl. I am going to describe a little bit of the layout of the castle as we transition shortly here to some of the upper floors, but I am tempted to do a tour video, and let me know if that's something you guys would like to see. This is a really big castle, but it is, I guess, a little bit repetitive in some of the theming throughout the different bedrooms. And once you see me really figure out what I want to do with a few of the rooms, a lot of them become very similar. Something that I talked a little bit about with my patrons is that there was a lot of space to utilize here. and I had a lot of towers that could be different things. And if this was a different kind of castle, like the Beauty and the Beast castle, for example, I probably would have utilized a lot of the spaces for hobbies and activities and things that were fun to do. But since this is specifically like a really rundown, horrible place to live where everybody is scared of Horned King, I don't personally feel like the extra spaces in this castle would make a lot of sense if they were utilized towards like fun things to do. Like there shouldn't be a full huge library here with lots of books for everybody to sit around reading. Like the henchmen from the movie are just not doing that. They're not all sitting in a room together doing like basically any activity that you can think of in The Sims 4. The only things that I wanted to make sure that I was utilizing the spaces for was movie references, activities that did make sense, like, let's be honest, sitting in the Great Hall and drinking together and partying. That is something that's shown in the movie, and that's probably something that they do when Horn King is not like immediately in the space. And then there will obviously be storage. There will be pantry rooms. There will be a wine or beer cellar of some kind. There are the rooms that you need, absolutely, like a kitchen and some dining spaces, but a lot of it ends up being bedrooms on the upper floors, especially, or on that first introductory floor when you first come into the castle over the bridge. So speaking of, when you first enter the castle over the bridge, you're going to immediately enter into the Great Hall. The Great Hall is attached to the throne room, and that throne room is where I was building that chair with the skulls. A lot of that is a bit of a movie recreation that is shown, and I was trying to pull out some of the details from that space. Off of that throne room is a much smaller, like, I guess you could say master bedroom, but I ended up building a secondary bedroom that I think is specifically for Horn King on the next floor up of this castle. So in my head, that room is kind of like where Horn King goes to relax sometimes when he's not sitting on the throne, or it's not crazy to assume that he has more than one bedroom in a castle like this. And that's why those rooms are actually a little bit nicer, not just the one off of the throne room, but the one that is upstairs that we will be decorating in a little bit here, that is kind of like his master bedroom. They're a little bit nicer. They have like slightly better carpets and maybe some red drapery and red furniture, which might be seen as like a little bit more lavish compared to the dreary browns, tans, darker furniture of the rest of the house. There is also a courtyard, which is similar to the Great Hall, but the courtyard has a bar, so you could actually have an easier access of drinking materials for your Sims. And the kitchen and a small dining area is also off of all of that main hallway there. And there is a nicer 2 bedrooms on that floor for maybe, I don't know, maybe some of the henchmen have nicer bedrooms. You can really pick if you wanted to. Of course, for the Disney save, I am going to go ahead and assign bedrooms, but I felt like the rooms that were on these levels needed to be more livable and more for the characters that are a part of the household. And then the dungeon levels needed to be like a completely different vibe as far as necessity and not things that are nice. But even in some of the nicer bedrooms of this castle, there is absolutely like, it's not nice. It's still crumbling. It's still not a lot of decor. It's still cobwebs and nothing really to do in a lot of ways. A lot of the characters don't have any hobby-based items in their bedrooms. Some of them may have a bookshelf, but I also felt like these aren't the type of characters to just like sit around and read like that, honestly. So it was really hard to pick hobbies and things that made sense with the characters that we are working with here. When you go up to the next floor, this was a really tough idea, or I guess I just didn't know what to do with the space up here, because we had so much tower room and spaces and additional little areas. And I guess my thought in the beginning was this could just be a bunch more bedrooms. But something, if you don't remember about the Black Cauldron, that they do mention is that this castle used to be owned by a different king at a different time. And I believe that the sword that Taryn finds in the downstairs levels is actually the former king's sword. And the Horn King took it over, and he has been not taking care of this place since. But it used to be a king's castle from probably a greater time that cared about it a lot more and had spaces utilized in a different type of way. So an idea that comes with a castle like this, especially this very old age type of castle that I haven't really utilized anywhere else in the Disney save, is the idea of having your own castle staff that is your dedicated castle blacksmith, a castle magician of some kind of like a Merlin, a castle woodworker, all of those staff members that are sort of in charge of creating things or making furniture or doing things for the castle that are very specific. And you could have the king go out into town or have his people go out into town and like source these types of things. But it also would have been somewhat common for certain highly skilled trades to be living and to be immediately readily available to the king and live on property as like a royal tradesman of some kind. So I thought that it would be a cool idea to, instead of making these upper levels more additional bedrooms, instead have them be remnants of some of those former tradesmen that would have lived at this castle under the former king. So there is a little bit of pieces left over from what they used to look like, these rooms. So specifically, again, I chose a blacksmith, a woodworker, and a magician. And there were conveniently on this floor 3 little bedrooms that come off of these towers that are connected to this second floor. And there was also a intertwining courtyard space in the middle of all of those rooms where these characters could have worked together almost like a shop, or this is where their living room or their end of the castle would be an office of some kind, but it's like this medieval version of the office, but it's not supposed to be a fully functioning version of this concept. I could do this in a different castle in a different way where it's almost like a whole wing of the castle is just for some of the trades and some of the people that the castle employs specifically. But this is not something that Horn King is actively employing anybody for. And so what is here is just the leftover bits of some of those people. So we still have the blacksmithing room, and there are still things that you could go in there and do. There is one particular grill that I believe comes with for rent, but I'm not actually quite sure. And to me, it always looks a little bit like it's leaning in the direction of blacksmithing. So I love to use it whenever this theming comes up. There is one room in the center that is for the woodworking table. And there is another room where I put some spellcastery type of items, the new apothecary table that comes from Enchanted by Nature. And all together on this floor, you could come up here and utilize some of these hobbies, but I also decorated it to look very abandoned and maybe as if this end of the castle is no longer in use because these characters do not live here anymore. There's also a bedroom for all of them where they would have like stayed together formerly. And this is actually the floor where Horn King's bedroom is located as well. That bigger, larger bedroom with the black bed towards the back end of the castle. That is Horn King's master bedroom that I was referencing earlier. This was my way of keeping everything on theme and doing some ideas that make sense for the time period, but not having it be super hobby based and not having it be like fun things to do for the characters that live here. However, depending on however you would like to play, there are things that you could come up here and utilize if you want to use the woodworking table, if you'd like to use that grill or that apothecary table. They are there and they're going to be accessible, but you can also just ignore them and consider them set dressing for the characters that live here now that are horrible and probably like to sit around and mostly drink outside in the courtyard. As we transition up to the other 2 levels above this one throughout the rest of the castle, a lot of it is just going to be lookout towers and where I thought some of the henchman characters may possibly go to try to escape Horn King a little bit, because again, the throne room is right off of that great hall on the base level of the castle. So if they spend time there trying to hang out and drink and party, and that's like where they want to be, they might run into Horn King from time to time. And even in the film, it is depicted as really an awful experience for him to be in the same room as you. They all get scared immediately, and they were having a great time until he showed up. So yes, they live here. Yes, they have to do what he wants. Who knows the reasons and the conditions under which a lot of them live here and why that would even be the case. But if they wanted to get away from him, perhaps they could go to some of these towers that are higher up in the levels of the castle that Horn King probably doesn't really venture to very often. And those are specifically going to be lookout towers. I don't know how much of that I included in the video, to be honest with you, but the way that they're decorated is mostly exactly like everything else that I've been showing so far, but maybe some like card and gambling tables, maybe a little bit of bars and some areas to get like quick drinks so you don't have to go to the other levels of the castle. And then I did place some additional beds on some of the upper floors of the castle, with the idea being that if you were on watch and there were a couple of you up there that are on watch, you would take turns and shift into who is actually watching, and then maybe some of them would sleep up there and some of them would take turns. I don't know. You can really utilize it for whatever you would want to. It just felt like something that would be appropriate if different sets of characters were taking shifts. And for a castle of this size, realistically, there would be much more than the 3 henchmen that I ended up creating, plus the guard dog, that live here and do help this household function to some capacity. I have been thinking a little bit about like who would be responsible for the necessities, such as cooking. And I do think it would ultimately be Creeper. Even the henchmen bully him in the movie, and they feel like it feels like they might be forcing him to do a lot of the tasks that maybe they are supposed to be responsible for, but because everybody finds it much easier to just pick on Creeper and make him do it, it is probably a good idea that he would be the one that does cooking and any other necessary tasks like repairing things that break in this castle, or maybe a little bit of cleaning here and there, depending on what it is, although I can't imagine that they clean up too much. Like if you wanted to leave a lot of mopping puddles and things around as you're playing throughout this castle, I could totally see that being the way to go. To transition to some current Sims news as we go throughout a little bit more of this castle, and when we go down to the dungeon areas, I'll address some things down there that are a little bit specific. But we recently finally, and you guys know I've been talking about this forever, I bring it up all the time, we did receive another official, some kind of notification from The Sims regarding save file corruption, specifically regarding like the Sims 4 for rent patch and all of that stuff. I want to clarify something that I've been seeing as like very, very common discourse amongst the Sims community. If you are one of those people that is confused what is being referenced here, when people are talking about the Sims 4 for rent corruption, it is because back when the Sims 4 for rent pre-pack patch, which was 2 years ago, 2 Decembers ago, came out, there were a lot of people that after that patch was launched had a ton of weird things happening to their game. I noticed immediately my computer completely, I thought, was fried over it. But when this patch was launched, there were varying arrays of things that happened. Number one is that you are in the lucky group and nothing happened to you or your saves or your games at all, and you've been using for rent and everything's been flawless for you, and I'm very, very happy for you if that is the case. Number two, you might be somewhere kind of in my boat where you have a larger save file or a legacy save or a generational save with a lot of characters and a lot of builds, and you immediately notice that your game was lagging considerably, crashing, or getting an endless loading screen. And the endless loading screen is my biggest issue, because when I build huge builds like this, they immediately become possible options for the endless loading screen. And that was never ever a problem before this patch came out. I had a lot of my larger builds that were completely fine, especially those community space lot types from the Eco Lifestyle pack, because when I make those, I tend to make 4 different types of lots that are stacked on top of one another with a lot of detail, and so there's a lot of data there, and they were all fine before that patch, but after that patch came out, some of them wouldn't load. I had to completely redo a lot of them, and I do still receive the endless loading even on new builds and new saves that I make, but I usually can work it out so that I remove some objects, remove some things, until they are no longer at that state anymore and they are releasable to the gallery and for the save file at large. or you actually got straight up real corruption with some kind of an error code that broke your save file, and maybe you made a new one and it happened again, or you were never able to get that save file back. And then something else that I've been seeing people talk about is that it's not for rent that causes the corruption. It's a base game corruption, or it's a base game problem. And it is basically just for rent makes this situation worse for you, or makes it happen to you more likely, or makes it happen quicker. I have seen people say that it shouldn't be happening to you at all if you don't use rentals, which is not true, because I don't use rentals and it happened to me, and all sorts of things. So if you've ever been wondering what it is that people are talking about, there's your explanation for what the issue is. And The Sims finally, after almost a year of silence, has said something about it. They have listed out some of the things that they are actively working on, some of the things that they did fix or that they have identified possible solutions for, and they are asking for save files to help them get to a place where they actually can totally fix this problem. So first and foremost, in the description of today's video, I will be linking that post, as well as how you submit your save file to The Sims if you experience any of the issues that I'm talking about. I do encourage you to go and read the article and read the post that they put out regarding what they're going to be doing to hopefully potentially fix this problem, and the list of issues a little bit more specifically than even how I've been speaking about them, so you can see if you fall under any of the categories, because they're looking for specific issues. However, if you are like me and you have had the endless loading screen, which is not a crash, if your Sims game is crashing, this is a different issue. This is when the game still is running at full like GPU and CPU, and everything looks good on that end of the computer, but it's not moving on to the next step of the game. And this is going to be from before the last patch, because I know a lot of your games probably broke under the last patch. We're talking about before that. What's unfortunate timing and very confusing is that we actually very recently just got another patch to The Sims that broke a ton of people's games, especially if you use script mods and you kept your mods in the mods folder while you were updating. Seems to be like one of the culprits, although I've seen people say that they didn't have their mods folder in while they updated and it still happened to them. I don't know, because I haven't updated my game, you guys. I'm so scared. I am waiting and just kind of like seeing if there's anything I can do, and waiting as long as I can to not update my game, because I was in the middle of this castle and this huge build in my brand new world, and I did not want to take that jump right now. I really needed to get this done and get a move on with all the things that I've been working on, so I was not in a place to go ahead and mess with my game at all. But what I mean to say is that if your game recently broke and has endless loading screens based off of the last patch to The Sims, I do not believe that that is related to what they're looking for at all. That's like a separate issue. It is usually mods related in some capacity. There are different fixes and things that you can find on TikTok that I've seen that some people have been able to get a workaround to get their Sims game up and running again. So if you're having new issues, I don't think you should necessarily consider that as a part of like what I'm talking about and submit your save file. If you have already had those issues, you should probably submit your save file. And I really, really encourage people to participate, because I don't want them to be able to say that they didn't have enough information and enough save files to fix this problem. They're looking for help. They are looking for information. I already submitted my Disney save to them. I can submit many, many other files to them, which I told them on the post. If you go over to the post, you'll see my comment. I have so many tray files and builds that used to work that no longer work. I would be probably the easiest, quickest person that they could possibly go to get the endless loading screen recreation if they need somebody to like make it happen for them so that they can study it and fix it. I can make it happen almost immediately with my community spaces from Eco Lifestyle. Stacking a couple of those bad boys on top of one another and trying to get some of those old versions of my Belle's Village and my Witch's Cottage from Brave to work, I can make that happen for them. No problem, no questions asked. Some of my large castle builds, my Luca household for some reason, my Luca house, I have had tons of endless loading with that Luca house. I don't know why. I've managed to work it out of the Disney save, but it's usually just from removing objects. And then eventually you get it down to a point where it stops doing it. But at the end of the day, they are looking for saves. They are looking for information. and they are claiming that they're going to fix this problem and that they're putting time into fixing it. And at the end of the day, we all want to see this game run smoother, work at full capacity, and the bugs and the issues to be worked out. So I would encourage people to participate in supplying them this information so that they can hopefully fix it, because we all want to move on from this nonsense. In reality, we want a game that functions like a lot stronger and a lot better, and them to basically stop releasing packs so that we can have some time for them to just fix like the base level code. But we all know that that's never going to happen. Nevertheless, we can at least do this and possibly have at least that working. And hopefully, if the underlying issue is that save files can only be a certain size before they start to auto delete and have a hard time loading all of the items and builds and larger households, and the bigger you make your save file, the more likely this is to happen to you. If that is the ultimate issue, hopefully they are actively working towards some kind of a solution to that specifically, because I cannot see how this game can continue to launch full expansion packs with more worlds and more things that just come at like the base level of this game without any additional stuff or mods or anything installed, and without my massive castle builds and all that in your game. Even if you just have all the packs, you're starting out with like a much larger base save file than somebody who maybe doesn't, but at the same time, they want people to purchase packs, no? And we are going to continue to release things for The Sims 4, and they want to keep going with this version of The Sims 4, and there's so many things that they could do that would make this game like even more massive. Can you imagine cars and what that would do to this game? Can you imagine hotels? And if rentals are already an issue, what that would do to this game? And people want to be able to buy all the packs and continue to support the franchise, then that base level problem needs to be solved quickly. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not holding my breath on them actually working towards that. But if they are, that would be the hope, that we are reaching a point where we can have all of the packs and actually play this game and continue to support it. And of course that it works well. And you can have a couple of hotels and a couple of rentals and some apartments and all of the packs installed, and it still runs. Because if they're going to sell all of it like that, then it needs to run all of it like that. Now for my dungeon, to move on to hopefully better things. I have a bit of space down here. There's a lot going on. There are, I think it ended up being 5 total dungeon bedrooms. You might be able to spot which one of the rooms is a Lanwis, because I think I made the bed a slightly different color. I was originally using those shabby sort of beds from Werewolves in all of the rooms, and I think I even kept that in her room, but I believe I changed the color to a little bit different of an option. I don't know if it's in the video, to be so honest with you though. And then her room has like one single activity in it, and I think a water trough of some kind. So she has access to some fresh water. Maybe somebody felt a little bit bad for her when she got captured and is being held here. Somebody was looking out for her and gave her the only one of the dungeon bedrooms that is even slightly nice, because it has a little bit of fresh water, and she drew a marble circle on the ground and has a little jar of marbles in her room where she can find something to do and something to collect. However, I just want to mention again that number one, she's really not supposed to live here. So I didn't want to like make a whole bedroom for her and have it be themed. Number one, that it just makes no sense because she doesn't live here. This isn't a place where she's going to be spending a ton of time. It's your job as the player to get her out of this situation. And number two, in the movie, she is actively escaping this castle before Taryn even arrives. It is a little bit of a save the princess from the castle situation, but she is also getting herself out of this castle when he gets there, and she actually gets him out first and foremost. Would she have made it the rest of the way without him and without the sword? Probably not, but she is actively like digging her way through the walls, and she opens up a piece of the floor and ends up in Taryn's bedroom, and that's how the two of them meet one another. So you never get to see the room that she was originally in. You don't know how long she's been in this castle. To me, it feels like she just got there. Like she literally just got there, and she is like, no way, I'm out of here. And she starts crawling through the floors and the walls, and she is getting herself out of there. Like she's like, I'm leaving with or without you, to Taryn almost immediately. So yes, I felt bad for her. yes, I wanted to give something to her room that added a little bit more life and gave her an activity in case you don't immediately come rescue her from this situation as the player. But at the end of the day, I don't really see it as like her living here. So I don't really even feel that bad because she's gonna get out. You know what I mean? The other rooms all pretty much identical on this floor as well. I did another sort of courtyard or great hall of some kind, very similar to the one that is upstairs in that main entryway, but this one has a bar in it yet again, and it also has a second throne for Horn King. So maybe this is kind of like a party room that's a little bit more specifically dedicated for events. I don't know. It's a secondary throne room. I can imagine something like that existing as well in a castle like this. Different levels of kinds of events, or maybe Horn King wants to be more present and readily available, but he's not just going to sit at the picnic tables with the rest of the henchmen. He's going to need his own special throne inside that room to be able to like actively be there. So this is just a different space in the castle for like a similar idea, but slightly different feeling. Since on the dungeon levels, there are 4 or 5 bedrooms, there needs to be a few places for the henchmen to be and to be able to keep watch. So right outside of most of the dungeon bedrooms is a collective like community area with a fireplace and some hay and some seating arrangements and like little bottles that they've been actively drinking, and that's where they would keep watch outside of these dungeon rooms. There is also a nicer bedroom on this floor that is in the back of the dungeons towards the treasury, which we haven't gotten to in the video yet, but you'll know when it starts happening. And that room is designed to be maybe the guardsman who lives down here and is in charge of more actively watching the dungeons. So in my head, this would specifically be the guard that Taryn runs into with the dog. And I think that's where I'm going to be putting him because he is a part of the household. So he needed a bedroom, but it couldn't be like exactly like the dungeon bedrooms. It needed to be something that was a little bit more, I guess, fitting of someone that's a part of the castle staff and isn't a dungeon bedroom, but it is still down here and still horrible. So it looks more like I guess I mean to say like nicer bedrooms on the upstairs floors, but I really wouldn't call them nice. So it feels weird being like, those are the nice bedrooms upstairs and then the bad bedrooms are downstairs, because all of the rooms in this castle are bad at the end of the day. They don't have nice things in them, but the nicer bedrooms are mostly upstairs. And then there is one down here that is for that guard and his guard dog. And then something that I decided to try in here, and I've thought about this many times, but I never did it. There was a little bit of I don't know how to do it. I'm not quite sure what items to use to pull it off. But I also decided that if there was going to be any kind of recreational activity here other than drinking, that the one I could probably get behind would be archery and practicing archery. And we don't have that currently in The Sims 4. And that's one of the reasons why, even though archery skills come up pretty frequently in relation to medieval theming, and back when I did Brave, that was something that I was really upset that we didn't have any of, because again, that's a very easy recreational activity to add to that castle lot that makes a ton of sense, specifically for that movie, most definitely. But I was like, you know what? I could probably work something out with the dartboards. And I never wanted to do it because it's a little bit funny to see Sims doing the animation for throwing darts and then call that archery. And it's definitely not, but it's the closest thing that we have at this point. So I thought maybe just for something fun to do around a little corner in a hallway down here, tucked away out of the sight of Horn King, where maybe he doesn't even come down here very often at all, other than to go into that great hall with his throne room. He's not going to spend a ton of time in the dungeon. If he needs to go or needs anything down here, he's going to send a henchman anyway. So they might have some things that are hidden down here that are fun for them to do, and that could be archery. So I decided to use some debug items and some little pieces and wall hanging adornments to make the dartboard look closer to an archery board. And it is not going to be like archery when they actually do it in game, but they are still going to look like something similar, and the boards definitely came out looking like something much closer to archery rather than having it be a dartboard. And I put a couple of those down here. My game actually crashed when I did that, when I made those, but I tested it a little bit. It seems to be working fine. I don't know why it threw a fit over that one. I didn't really talk about it too much, but in the middle is the scene where Horn King finally gets the Black Cauldron and he uses it to resurrect his dead army. And it's green and smoky and on top of this layered platform in the basement level or in the dungeon level of his castle. And that is a huge scene and really important for several reasons throughout the film. So it had to be down here, and I put it right in the middle of this downstairs area. There is a little cauldron there as a placeholder. It is the one from spellcasters so that your sim could actually like actively use it. Horn King is a spellcaster, and I felt like I needed to do that just so that he could do some potions making and some magic because of the cauldron, not necessarily because he is portrayed as magical. It's always a really tough decision when I make a Disney character in the save on whether or not to make them an occult based on whether they are magical or they use magic sometimes. Like if a character comes across magic or a magic item, or they are able to use magic in a very specific circumstance, but generally not, or are they actually a full-blown magic user? It's hard to sometimes decide whether or not to make the full leap to spellcaster. I did not originally really think to depict him as a spellcaster after watching the movie, and then I went into my save file and I realized that the first version of him that I ever made, he was a spellcaster, and I probably did that for two reasons. Number one, again, because of the interactions regarding the cauldron, and so that he could have those magical interactions with that item specifically, because if your sim is just a regular sim, if they try to use that cauldron item, they can only cook in it. And that really wasn't going to work for like the telling of the movie. And also just for that household back in the day when he used to live with Hades and Chernobog, those were all magical sims, and so I wanted to make him a magical sim so that he fit in a little bit better with the other characters that were living there. It was one of my occult households, and one where I had like a mix of occults living together and creating that kind of a dynamic amongst the characters. So I can see why I did it, and I ultimately decided that it makes sense for it to stay. What this is also gonna do is allow me to give him a familiar like I did before. And instead of having it be the skull familiar and calling it Creeper, since I have made Creeper now and he will be a part of the save file, I am instead going to give him the black dragon familiar, because in the movie he has two small black dragons. And I figured it would be funny to give him two black dragon familiars and name them the different names. And then that can be a way to pay tribute to those characters as well that are in the film. They're not like important Disney dragons by any means. I don't even think they canonically have names, but they are in the film and they are his like little pets and creatures. So for that reason, they actually fit the familiar category much better than Creeper ever did anyway. And we just so happen to have a black dragon familiar. So it's a good use of those, considering that I don't really use familiars in The Sims 4 very often. I like them to be a little bit rare, and I have a couple characters like Mama Odie and Dr. Facilier, and I think Athena from the Greek god household that all have familiars, but I don't... Oh, also Maleficent has the Raven familiar, but I don't want to overuse them, and I haven't gotten to use the dragon characters yet, so it'll be cool. Other things on this floor as we get towards the end of the video, this is near the area where Terran discovers the sword of the former king, and he finds his tomb somewhere amongst the catacombs of the castle. It might be in the dungeon area. It's probably a little bit more hidden than that, considering that if Horn King knew that a magic sword was in his castle, he probably would have it himself. So I think that it is a little more hidden than the way that I've personally depicted it in this castle, but that's okay. At the end of the day, as you guys can imagine, just looking at this build, unfortunately, even though you guys used to tell me the other Horn King castle was a huge build and a little bit hard to run on PCs, guess what? This one is too. This one might even be worse with the full moat and the water and the full underground and all of the little details and levels that I did. I would apologize, and I do feel a little bit bad, but it came out so good, and I love every single inch of it too much to be too apologetic. So, yes, I could have created a version where we have the king's room, burial room, and it is more hidden and maybe tucked under a couple more levels, and there's some more hallways and tunnels to get there. But at the end of the day, we're already running a pretty massive space as it is here. It's just not going to be a necessary detail. So I was thinking about possibly locking that door and not making it readily available to any of the Sims that live here. None of the henchmen or anybody can get in there, and that way they just won't go in there and interact. But to be honest with you, there isn't really any objects for them to go into there anyway. So other than storytelling purposes, you might not have to go in that space at all. And then lastly, there is a treasury room, I guess you could call it. The treasury room is actually the room where Horn King has been keeping all of the skeletons and dead people, so that when he wants to resurrect them for his army, he has creatures and skeletons that are actively readily available. And this is actually depicted in the film, weirdly enough. The characters and Creeper are like carting around skeletons and storing them along with other versions of the cauldrons that they presumably thought were possibly the Black Cauldron and turned out not to be. And they throw it all into this big room of just junk and bones. And it is kind of like their treasury, which I have depicted in a few other instances in some of my other castles. But this is one that's a little bit more specific than just gold and treasure. And so I put a lot of little cauldrons in the room. I put down some different skeleton bones and some piles of skulls and things that are from the debug of Jungle Adventure. There is also a wine cellar down here and a additional pantry for some storage items. And honestly, that's going to be most of the build today. My huge, new, beautiful Horn King castle. I hope you guys liked it. I am absolutely so excited to show off so much more in Ravenwood, and there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff to come, so I hope that you guys stick along for the journey. I'm going to try to go through as fast as possible, considering that we all want to get to Innisgreen, but at the same time, give this world the love and attention that it definitely deserves. Let me know all your thoughts about the castle in the comments section down below. And of course, if you would like to support the Disney Save on Patreon, you can do so by clicking the link in my description box below or the one at the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will talk to you all in the next one.